So for our first talk, Dr. Fernandez is going to come to us live from Zoom. So he's going to talk about some methods for irrigation, scheduling, and all right, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to be here today with all of you. Hello to everybody. As mentioned, we are going to speak today about irrigation management. Well, anybody that manages irrigation has to make decisions on three main things. First of all, which irrigation system is going to be used, also which irrigation strategy is going to be applied, and which irrigation scheduling method is going to be used to calculate the amount and timing of irrigation. Today we are going to speak a little bit on irrigation strategies, but mainly we are going to focus on methods to schedule irrigation. Well, let's go and start with the irrigation strategy. For instance, let's go and start with full irrigation. Well, this curve that you can see there in the screen is what we call the production curve. And this is the shape that it has for most fruit tree species, including peach. As you can see, when you increase the irrigation, that is a linear response of yield. And later on, when you are approaching the maximum yield, the curve becomes horizontal. So applying full irrigation means that you estimate the irrigation needs with this equation over there. The irrigation needs are calculated as the water required by the crop minus the amount of water supplied by the rainfall. And if you apply this irrigation strategy, you will keep the soil very close to field capacity all along the growing cycle of the crop, so under non-limiting soil water conditions. However, you see what happens because the curve is, when approaching full irrigation, is becoming horizontal. It may happen that the cost of applying this amount of irrigation, this increase in the irrigation amount, doesn't pay you for this little increase in yield. So sometimes the most profitable option is not full irrigation, is what we call this point here, the best option. And this occurs especially when the water and electricity to irrigate are expensive. In these cases, full irrigation is not really the advisable strategy. Another thing to take into account is that if you use full irrigation, you don't allow for the crop to use the water stored in the soil. You know, the crop can use a substantial amount of water stored in the soil before becoming stressed, before becoming below what we call the allowable depletion threshold, which is that the soil is so depleted, the water in the soil, that the trees are already suffering from water stress. So if instead of applying full irrigation, you apply what we call recommended irrigation, in which the irrigation needs are calculated as the water required by the crop minus the amount of water supplied by the rainfall, minus the allowable depletion, this amount of water stored in the soil. In this case, you can save, depending on the soil texture and density and condition, but you can save in between 20 or 30% of the total irrigation amount, which is a substantial saving. Actually, you have here, for instance, the amount of irrigation that you have to supply, depending on whether you use full irrigation or full irrigation minus the allowable depletion of the soil, so the so-called recommended strategy, for different species, including peach, super high density olive orchard, almond, and citrus. The data are in cubic meter per hectare because these are the units that we use in this part of the world, but it doesn't matter. The key point, the main point, is that you can save, as I said before, between 20 and 30% of the total irrigation amounts when you use this strategy, considering the soil the amount of water stored in the soil. Well, both full irrigation and the recommended irrigation are possible when you have enough water in the soil. But I mean, enough water for irrigation. But if the amount of water available for irrigation is low, in this case, you are bound to use a deficit irrigation strategy. I mean, a number of deficit irrigation strategies have been described, but the most efficient one is what we call regulated deficit irrigation. We call it regulated because what we do is we study how sensitive, how tolerant how sensitive to the lack of water, or how tolerant to stress the crop is depending on the phenological stage of the crop. For peaches, actually stage 2 and post-harvest stage 4 is when the trees are more tolerant to stress. So in these two particular stages, you can lower down the irrigation amounts without penalizing the crop performance. For instance, this is an experiment made in southeast Spain, the city of Murcia, in which the authors, they apply two different water treatment, a control treatment in which they irrigate a full irrigation, supply 100% of the crop evapotranspiration along the whole growing season, and also a regulated deficit irrigation strategy in which irrigation was reduced to 70% at stage 2 and to 50% at post-harvest. And you can see that by applying this regulated deficit irrigation, they were able to save something like 34% of the total irrigation amounts. They applied these two treatments for 3 different years, 3 consecutive years, and they monitor variables related to crop performance, both yield and quality, and they found no differences whatsoever between the two treatments. Only a little bit difference here, but for the rest of the data, differences were non-significant. So this example illustrates that a properly chosen deficit irrigation strategy sometimes is the best option. Okay, let's go now and focus on the methods to schedule irrigation. Well, you can schedule irrigation from soil water measurements, from measurements, meteorological measurements, or for measurements made in the plant. Let's go and have a look to these 3 different approaches, starting with soil water measurements. Well, I am sure that you are familiar with a wide range of sensors and related equipment that you can find in the market to measure either the soil water content of the energy with which the soil retains water, which is called the matrix potential or suction. And some of these devices are coming with a software that allows you to follow the time course of irrigation in a very nice way. For instance, this particular software shows you how the water in the soil is changing depending on the irrigation events, depending on the rainfall. Now, if in this software you fix the levels for field capacity and allowable depression threshold for your orchard, you can be sure that the amount of water in the soil is always correct, or maybe here you irrigated too much, or maybe here you gave an irrigation event too late, so you became below the allowable water depletion level. So basically, this kind of software associated to the sensors allows for a user-friendly management of irrigation. Now, to properly schedule irrigation from soil water measurement, you should know main hydraulic characteristics of the soil. For instance, what we call the water retention curve, or the volume of the root zone, the volume of the soil explored by the roots, or the soil hydraulic conductivity, which is related to the speed at which water moves into the soil. But even if you don't know these main soil hydraulic characteristics, you can be able to manage properly irrigation from soil water measurements. For instance, you can install one soil water content sensor at something like 30 or 40 centimeters below below ground, where the maximum root densities can be found. And the output of this sensor 24 hours after a heavy rainfall will give you the value of field capacity. Or if you leave the soil to dry out until the first symptoms of wilting appears in the plant, the output of the sensor at that particular moment will give you information on the allowable water depletion limit. Okay. On the other hand, if you place a chip sensor, it doesn't have to be as accurate as the previous one. Chip sensor are something like 8 to 10 inches above the effective rooting depth. This sensor may help you to estimate the time the number of hours for which you have to irrigate, because you can start applying water on the ground, and when this sensor gives you a peak in the data, which means that the waterfront has already reached that particular depth of the soil, then you stop irrigation. If you do that, you are able to avoid heavy losses of water by drainage. Okay? So as you can see, just by good practice and without detailed information on the soil hydraulic characteristic, you can manage irrigation in an efficient way based on soil water measurements. So the advantage of this approach is that the sensors are usually cheap, not always. This is why I put the question mark, but usually. And they are easy to use, easy to maintain, so it's a quite user-friendly system. The main problem is the high soil variability. The main problem is that you install two soil water sensors just a few meters away, one from the other. The outputs from the sensor can be quite different, and this is a limitation. Another limitation, of course, is that you are disregarding the plant physiology, the atmospheric demand. Also, you don't know sometimes the meaning of a particular output of the sensor. So you don't know sometimes, for instance, 28% of soil water content, the impact that this particular data are going to have in the crop performance. So these are limitations of this approach. Okay, let's go and see another approach is to estimate irrigation amounts and timing from meteorological measurements. In this case, for instance, you use the well-known crop coefficient approach, in which you calculate the amount of water needed by the crop as the product in between the reference evapotranspiration, the so-called ETO, by a coefficient that we call the crop coefficient. Okay, the values of ETO are obtained from meteorological stations close to the orchard, and sometimes this information is obtained by or is provided by free for the local government. For instance, this is the area where I live, Andalusia, in South Spain. Actually, I'm living here, very close to Sevilla, to the city of Sevilla. And these yellow dots that you can see in the map are weather stations belonging to our local government. So the growers can connect to a weather station nearby their orchards, and they can download by free the ETO values without paying anything. And you have to multiply these values by the so-called crop coefficients I mentioned before. Here in the table, you have an example of how to use the crop coefficient approach to estimate the crop evapotranspiration in the San Joaquin Valley in California. And you can see the values of the crop coefficient depending on the time of the year. You have to be careful because these values, for instance, which were obtained for the San Joaquin Valley, maybe they don't apply to your area. So you have to be sure that the values of the crop coefficient apply for the area in which you have your orchard. So the advantage of this approach is that it's very cheap and easy to use. If the crop coefficients are okay, you can find quite reliable values. But as I said before, the crop coefficient values are empirical, so you have to be sure that you choose right value for your area. Okay, the last approach is to schedule irrigation from plant-based measurements. there is a high number of variables from the plants that you can use to schedule irrigation. Let's go and have a look to some of them. But before that, you know why plant-based variables are so useful to schedule irrigation? Because they fulfill the three requirements for precision irrigation, to irrigate really in a precise way. The requirements are, first of all, the measurements must be automatic and continuous. And actually, many of the sensors related to plant-based measurements, they work automatically in a continuous way. Also, the sensor should be able to be implemented with data transmission systems. Actually, this is what you see here. For collecting the data sent to your computer, and you can analyze the data in real time, and every day or every time that you want to see how irrigation is going on or how the water stress levels of the plant is going on. And then, finally, the data has to be good quality data. Now, look to this scheme here. If you use soil water measurements to schedule irrigation, the problem is that irrigation depends very much on transpiration, on the amount of water consumed by the plant. But if you schedule irrigation based on soil water status only, you are missing the change or the impact of atmospheric demand and the impact of the plant physiology, which affect very much transpiration. Now, if you are using the crop coefficient approach, which is based on weather measurements, you are missing the soil water status and the plant physiology. But if you measure something in the plant, actually you use the plant as a biosensor which integrates the soil water status, the atmospheric water demand, and the physiology of the plant. So this is why using plant-based measurement provides you of a very good quality data to schedule irrigation. One of the most widely used variables from the plant to schedule irrigation is the so-called leaf or stem water potential. Until very recently, this variable was measured with this apparatus here, which is called the Descolandre chamber. For instance, you have here an example for a peach orchard in which they apply full irrigation and regulated deficit irrigation. And they measure every 1 hour and a half or 2 hours all along the day with the Descolandre chamber, the level of water stress of the plant, and you see the differences. But you can imagine that this is very expensive. You need somebody, a specialized technician, you need the apparatus, a vehicle, so this is very expensive. This is not practical at all. The good news is that very recently a couple of sensors have been developed which they work continuously, automatically, and they send you the data, the outputs to your mobile phone or your tablet or your computer. So this facilitates very much the use of this variable leaf or stem water potential to schedule irrigation. Other three highly used variables from the plant to schedule irrigation are SAP Flow measurements, trunk diameter variations, and leaf turgor pressure. All these three measurements also they have the three conditions required for precision irrigation that we have mentioned before. Let's go and have a look to them. Well, you can see that most of the pictures are made with ingolic trees because this is the species that I work with more. But anything that we are talking today and saying today can be applied to any other fruit tree species, including peach, of course. Well, concerning SAP Flow, something like a dozen of different methods has been can be found in the market. Basically, you introduce some sensors in the trunk, and this sensor measures the amount of water flowing from the roots to the canopy. So you are able to monitor in real time how much water is transpiring in the tree. Actually, this is, for instance, an example from one of the orchards in which I use this method. This is data for a week in which I measure the transpiration based from SAP Flow measurements, how it was changing depending on the day, according to the atmospheric demand. In this case, the atmospheric demand is represented by the vapor pressure deficit of the air. And you can see that the data of transpiration echoes the change in atmospheric water demand. So actually, SAP flow measurements are really very useful to schedule irrigation because it gives you reliable value on how much water the tree is consuming. Another method or another variable, the trunk diameter variation. You can measure variations in the trunk diameter with some sensors called dendrometer. You have here two of them, two different models. Basically, what happens is the following. At dawn, when the plant has been the whole night without transpiring, the diameter of the trunk is maximum. Then after sunset, after the sun arises, the stomata open, the plant starts losing water, and the diameter of the trunk decreases because of the loss of water until something like midday, in which the stomata close again, and the plants recover, the plants rehydrate again, so that the diameter of the tree increases again, the diameter of the trunk. So by using this technique, you can monitor, for instance, the daily growth, which is the difference between the two maximum trunk diameter values measured in 2 consecutive days, and you can measure other indicators of water stress. This technique has been widely used in fish with very good results, actually. I will show you here an example made from olives. This is an experiment in which I irrigate in 2 different ways. I have one irrigation treatment in which I irrigate every 5 to 7 days with enough water to keep the soil close to field capacity conditions. And in a second treatment, I apply a deficit irrigation strategy. So I irrigate up to here, and then I stop irrigation and I wait until the first symptoms in the fruits appear of wilting, right? So when this happens, I irrigate again, and then the soil was drying down. This is the soil water content, how it changed along the time. So, and you can see here the response of the dendrometer for the 2 different water treatments. And you can see here, for instance, for the deficit irrigation treatment, how the data from the dendrometer echoes very well the amount of water, which is to say the water stress levels in the tree. Okay. Well, the first method that I would like to mention, and the last one actually, is measurements with the so-called fin probes. The fin probes are tiny sensors, sorry, very little sensor, and you put the leaf in between the upper and down part of the sensor, as you can see here. And in the down part, the probe has a highly sensitive pressure sensor. So this pressure sensor actually monitors the so-called leaf turbo pressure. The leaf turbo pressure changes depending on the level of hydration of the tree. When the tree is well irrigated, we get this curve from the sensor. This is the night, and this is the time course of the outputs of the sensor during the day. And the point is that when there is a low water stress, you get this kind of curve. And when the stress increases from low to moderate and from moderate to severe stress, the shape of the curve change. So there is no need to do calculation. Just by having a look to the daily outputs of the sensor, you can see the level of water stress in your orchard. So the advantages and disadvantages of these techniques, you have them there. As I say, the advantages is that they can be used for precise irrigation. Now, but this technique has 2 main disadvantages. One of them, that the sensors are not cheap, they are expensive, and also that you have to be trained in order to use them properly, because the data interpretation and data processing and so on is not easy. So how can you palliate these 2 limitations? Well, concerning the complexity of the technique, a very pragmatic and easy way, just to hire a company, which actually the company, what they do is you decide which method do you want to use, and the company install the sensor, maintain the sensor, collect the data, process the data, and send you very easy but effective instruction to your mobile phone for scheduling irrigation. You have here, for instance, this is a Spanish company, this is from Israel, this is from Germany. So there are companies that they provide these services for a fee. Okay? Now, in order to reduce the cost, the most effective way is to choose very well the sampling locations. Imagine that you have a very large orchard, several hundreds or maybe a couple of thousands of hectares, so large orchard. And these are the questions that you may pose yourself if you want to use one of these sensors. How many sites should I instrument? Where should I put the sensors? Will my measurement representative enough of what is going on in the orchard? All right, so, but you have no information of where on how to use the sampling location. But you can use remote imagery techniques, for instance, which allow you to identify the variability within the orchard. For instance, in this particular case, we have applied this remote imagery technique, and we have identified 4 what we call agronomic management units, which are areas of the orchard, fractions of the orchard that have similar conditions in that area and different from other areas. For instance, in this case, we have 4 different colors, so we identified 4 different agronomic management units: the yellow, the brown, the light green, and the dark green. So it is a question of sampling just a few trees within each of those agronomic management units in order to have data representative enough of the whole orchard with a reduced number of sensors. Okay, so I am arriving to the end of my presentation now. So important points that I would like to outline here. You have to ask yourself this question over there. Are you looking for increasing yield or for increasing profits? Because sometimes it's not the same thing, right? If your production target is yield, probably you have to look for full irrigation, but if your production target is to get as more money as possible, maybe a deficit irrigation strategy is advisable. Now we have been mentioning a number of methods, and you may ask, okay, which one is the best? Well, there is not the best method. That depends on the condition of the orchard, your capacity for investment, your training, whether you have the possibility of hiring a company or not to provide you with the data, and so on. So, of course, every grower, every farmer has to choose the method that best suits the conditions in which this person is living and the conditions of the orchard. And finally, there is a very important question. If you want to adopt a new method to schedule irrigation, the important question is, all right, if I adopt it, how much my profit will increase? This is a key question. You have the right to pose this question to the company selling you or offering you the system or the approach to schedule irrigation. The company should provide you an answer for you to be sure that adopting a new irrigation, a new method to schedule irrigation is going to be beneficial to you. Otherwise, there is no point of changing. Okay, that's it. This is just a photograph of the people of my team. Everything that I have been mentioning here is product of the work of everybody in my team. So that's all. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. And we are gonna, we don't have time for questions right now, so we're gonna move on to our next presentation, but Dr. Fernandez is gonna be around for the roundtable at the end of this. So if you have questions, hold them for just a little bit.
Hey, good morning. So I'd like to begin today's presentation with a very simple yet critical question. Raise of hand, how many of you know when and how much to irrigate? So I think we all can agree that water is undeniably one of the most vital resources in farming, and making informed decisions is key to success. So today I'm excited to introduce to you Treatoscope's direct plant sensing technology. This is a groundbreaking tool that provides real insights into your crop's water use measurement utilizing SAP Flow Sensors. So before we start, just a little bit about me. My name is Melissa Steidemeyer. I'm from Northern California, but I've had the opportunity to work with several growers across the United States. With 14 years of experience in agriculture, I've seen firsthand the challenges you all face, and that's why I decided to focus my career in the ag tech space to help growers like you mitigate risks and optimize your operations using innovative technology such as Treatoscope. So with that being said, I'm really excited to share with you today how Treatoscope can help you be more efficient with your irrigation practices. So today we're really going to focus on the technology itself. We'll also dive into the key features and benefits. Then I'll show you how easy it is to integrate this into your orchard. And then we're going to spend some time on the grower dashboard so that you can see the tools available to you as a grower. Then we have a few case studies from here on the East Coast focusing on peaches and pecans that I'll share with you. And then at the end, if there's time, we'll take questions. But I do want to note, we do have our technology on display at the Tri-S booth. So if you haven't got the chance yet, I encourage you to go over there and take a look at it. And actually, after this presentation, I plan to go directly over there. So if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So for those of you who not heard about Treatoscope before, Treatoscope is an Israeli-founded company, founded in 2021. We already have over 1,500 sensors deployed, and we're currently in 4 countries, including the US, Mexico, Spain, and Turkey. Our local support here on the East Coast is funneled through our dealer network. In this case, I've already mentioned Tri-S and then also Bell Irrigation. So what do we actually do? So our platform is built around an AI-driven irrigation management system. And what truly sets our technology apart is our unique single probe patented sensor. And so what this is doing is measuring sap flow and essentially measuring the plant water consumption directly from the trunk of the tree. And because of this, our direct approach makes our technology unique compared to other methods or technologies. And in doing this, we can provide the growers with several benefits. As you can see from this slide, there are several advantages to our technology. However, the main thing I hear from my growers is that it gives the confidence to make you feel like you can make better irrigation decisions. In addition, growers who are using our technology, they're reducing water waste. I know many of you rely on ponds and have limited water resources. Also saving energy costs. We know those diesel pumps aren't cheap to run. And then just gaining valuable insights such as, understanding when the trees are becoming active and when they're going into dormancy. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts of how it works. Our direct plant sensing technology revolves around 4 sources of data, 3 of which include soil data, local meteorological data, and satellite imagery, or NDVI. The 4th element, and the most important, is our patented direct plant sensor. So what we do is we take all these tools and we integrate them into a very simple, comprehensive dashboard for the grower. And what's nice about our technology is our dashboard presents the data at the block level. So it makes it really easy for you to understand the total irrigation needs of each block. So many of you may be wondering, where in the tree are direct plant sensors measuring? So if we go back to a process that we're all familiar with, trees uptake water through the roots, transports to their trunk, and eventually releases through the leaves. And what's particularly interesting is that this movement happens through the tree's xylem. So the xylem serves as the perfect location to measure fluid movement within the tree. And by tapping into this critical pathway, we can gain some valuable insights into the tree's water use dynamics, which will be essential for optimizing your irrigation practices. So how do we measure? It's really quite simple. We have a single probe sensor that I mentioned. It features a small metal probe that serves two purposes. First, it measures the environmental temperature of the tree. And then second, it generates a small amount of heat. So why does it do this? What we're doing is we're measuring the rate of energy transfer, which allows us to calculate the heat dissipation. And so from this, we can drive the SAP flux. And then we use this as a calculation for the foundation, how we determine real-time water use. Also worth noting, the sensor takes measurements every hour during the day, so you will get continuous data points. So to integrate this into your orchard, it's quite simple. The first thing we do is create a polygon in our dashboard to define your irrigation zone. This polygon will represent the specific area that you irrigate all at once. So by mapping this into our system, the data collected by our sensors will directly be tied to that irrigation zone, ensuring that the insights you receive are both accurate and relevant to your operations. The next step is that our team will use NDVI to map out your block. And NDVI allows us to utilize a satellite view of your block, revealing really important information such as tree health and vegetation. This data is incredibly valuable because it often correlates with different soil types across your block. And by analyzing this information, we can strategically place the sensors in locations that offer the best representation of the site. So this ensures that the data that we collect is accurate and meaningful to your site. So the next thing we do is we create a sensor site analysis. This is basically a recommendation of where to install the sensors. This map essentially guides the installation process, ensuring that the sensors are placed strategically. So instead of us coming out and just installing at the end of the row because it's convenient, we strategically place these sensors to pinpoint areas within your block that will provide that most accurate data. And we use a minimum of 3 sensors per irrigation zone to make sure that we capture these data points. So the last step is installation. This will be installed by your certified Treatoscope dealer. It's a very quick installation. Honestly, any one of you can do it. I'd say the most it takes per sensor is about 20 minutes. And there's very minimal tools needed. All you need is a smartphone and a drill. So let's take a closer look at the hardware itself. First, on the picture on the left, you have the communication box. So the communication box, we usually hang that in a secure location like the branch of the tree. And the box is extremely durable, very rugged. It comes with a 2-year battery life. It also comes with a rural cellular communication chip that ensures that we can even pick up the weakest signal if you have some issues with signal out in your field. So the second component in the middle picture, that's our sensor. The sensor, like I said, it's a patented single probe sensor. It's only 1 inch, so that means we're only drilling an inch into the tree. And when we drill into the tree, we're essentially creating a small wound. But depending on the plant species, it takes about 3 to 5 days. and the tree will actually heal very nicely to the sensor. And then it goes through what we call a 2-week plant binding process. And that 2-week plant binding process allows that healing time, allows us to normalize that data. And then after that period, the grower gets instant data. The data is live. So there is no calibration needed during out the season. Also, I forgot to mention a really important aspect is this is harvest friendly. So we do not need to come uninstall and then reinstall for harvest, as long as we install in a in a good location. We shouldn't have to come out to do any repairs on the sensors for 2 years. And then last but not least, the third picture, that's our inline flow sensors. So that is a new product. And what that's going to do is allow us to capture your actual flow rate. And then we upload that in real time to the dashboard. And so what that allows us to do is capture when you're irrigating. So when the start, the end, how much time, inches, and gallons. So I also want to highlight that this is our new generation sensor called SAP Sense. So with SAP Sense, it's equipped with an upgraded algorithm. It also comes with the new dashboard features that we're going to dive into, such as like real-time stress monitoring and the actual irrigation tracking that I mentioned. And additionally, this dashboard will include a farm management tool, and now you have the ability to have automated reports. So make sure you look for the sensor with our new generation green label, and all of our existing customers will automatically be updated to this new generation sensor. So what happens after installation? Once installation is completed and the data is live, we'll schedule a quick dashboard training with you to ensure you're basically comfortable navigating through the dashboard. And additionally, as I mentioned, we offer automated reports. So those automated reports basically show you the last 7 days of actual water consumption, and then they give you the irrigation requirement or forecast for the next 7 days. So I have some growers who really like this because they'll meet with their farm managers or irrigation managers, like say every Monday, and they'll use this kind of game plan to make their irrigation decisions. So let's jump into the dashboard. So this is just a demo of the dashboard, and actually if I have any of our current growers in the audience, you'll notice that this is a little different than what you normally see. That's because this is the new generation dashboard, and it actually will be launching next month. So you guys kind of have the first inside look to some of the new features. So if you look to the left, this is basically where you can navigate and organize all your blocks. In addition to just being able to easily toggle from block to block, you'll be able to identify what stress they're currently in. So you can see Pecan East, for instance, that's in high stress, versus Pecan South, moderate stress, and so on. In addition, those inline flow sensors that I mentioned, they're real time, so you'll be able to see when the irrigation's actually on, which you can see in the icon there. Then if you jump to the interactive map that we have, basically tells you the same data points, and then a little bit more. So you can see the gray with the white tree logos. That's actually where we installed the sensors at. And you can actually select that, and it will give you the GPS coordinates and take you directly to the sensor. And then those blue sprinkler icons, that's just another way of seeing my irrigation's on in that block. And then the color code for each polygon, that's also indicating the stress. And then we know weather has a big impact on how much your trees are transpiring. So we also offer the weather, but besides just basic weather, you'll get max BBD, humidity, and daily ETO as well. So let's jump to the 3 cards in the middle. I think that's the most important data. The first one is the actual consumption. So that is what our data from the sensors are picking up. So that's telling you in this instance that yesterday this specific block did 0.22 inches. You can also adjust by the metrics and see it in gallons as well. And then we have the irrigation requirement. This is something that you can look to the future. So this kind of gives you somewhat of a forecast of the next 7 days. And there's a very sophisticated algorithm behind this in that we take the last 10 days of sensor data and we tie that in with local meteorological data to kind of give you that irrigation requirement or forecast needed for that specific block. And that is constantly changing because the weather's constantly changing. And then what's also really nice, we now have it where you can see it in runtime. So if we either capture your flow rates from you or you utilize our inline flow sensors, we can tell you exactly how long. So we basically transfer from inches to gallons to runtime for you. The last is actual irrigation. Pretty self-explanatory. It's showing you in inches, gallons, and runtime, how long you've ran your irrigation for. And all these 3 cards, you can click on them. It'll give you a full summary from the day of installation, and you can export that to Excel. So all this data is available to you. You don't have to contact anybody from my team or your dealer. You have that available to you 24/7. So let's look at the bottom graph. It's the basically the block overview. I like to think of it as a bird's eye view of basically all the data points we just talked about. The dark green line, that's your actual consumption. That is coming from the sensors. And it shows you day by day what that actual consumption is. And then you also can see the stress for each day. So that is a new feature that we have. And that is taken from historical data. We're also looking at the stress factors for specific varieties. And then we're looking at thresholds compared to ETO as well. And then last but not least on the bottom there, we have a second graph, and you can think of that as basically all the water that's been applied to your orchard. So the dark blue is what you actually irrigated, and the light blue is the rain taken from that weather data. So you can look at it as a whole and see what has been applied. So now that you've seen how our dashboard works, I wanted to show you the other crops that our technology is certified for. We basically cover all permanent crops, as you see on this slide. Here on the East Coast, we've been working specifically with pecan, citrus, and peach growers. So let's dive into a couple of the case studies that we've conducted here. This is from a peach orchard in South Carolina. This is focusing on 3 separate blocks of late season peach varieties. You have the Flame Prince and 2 blocks of August Ladies. And first I want to mention that it's really nice about our data points is that you can see when the trees come out of and go back into dormancy. But if you take a close look at this data, you can see that the green bar represents Flame Prince, and then the orange and purple bars represent August Lady. And what stands out is the orange August Lady block, which you can see is an outlier in April, but later returned to the rest of the group, but then had an outlier again in September and November. And then also with the hurricane weather in September and the dry October month, you can see the trends going in a downward trend as far as actual water consumption. This slide compares early versus late season varieties. In this example, we're looking at Spring Flame and August Lady. And as you can see, the early variety shown in the blue exhibits a higher water consumption at the start of the session or the season. And this is because early varieties like Spring Flame have a shorter window to develop and grow large fruit, which require more water earlier in the season to meet their accelerated growth demands. And then you can see towards the end of the season, in October and November, the trend reverses. So a really interesting study showing you again that each site, each variety, each tree is very unique, and having technology like Treatoscope can help you really dial in those irrigation needs. The last case study is a pecan case study. And in this study, we're comparing ETO versus our ETA. And ETO, shown in gray, represents a reference evapotranspiration model. It's widely used to calculate irrigation management from a standard reference. And the ETA in green reflects the actual data captured by our sensors. And so basically what to take away from this case study is that the ETO starts to deviate from our data in green in August and September. And by relying on our site-specific recommendations, you can really dial in and identify the tree's true water needs. In this case, the data revealed a decline in water consumption, indicating a reduced need for irrigation during this period. So hopefully, from these case studies in this presentation, you were able to see how our technology can embrace real-time data, allow you to gain control, clarity, and confidence into your irrigation. I hope this presentation has inspired you to think differently about your irrigation and how the potential impact of real-time water use measurement. Thank you.
We've got a couple minutes if anybody has any questions. And I think you said you were heading back to your booth.
Yep, so right after this, I'll be headed to the Treyas booth. So if anybody has any direct questions there, or if you want to see the technology in person, I'd be happy to answer them.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, no, we can definitely see that in the trends. I think the main thing is that in this case study, we're seeing that compared to a late variety, there's definitely more transpiration, more actual water consumption that's required by the earlier variety.
I think it's bigger related.
Okay, well, we can dive more into it if, oh, go ahead.
You have some data to know how the crop load is affecting the water consumption?
How
A linear relation with your technology?
how the crop what?
How the crop load would affect water consumption. Do y'all have any data?
Like
Like if it was a heavy peak year, is that?
Yeah, if the grower can give us yields and things like that, then we can do that. But all our sensors are doing is they're just reading the data points from the tree on the actual water consumption. So we don't tie into anything else except for what's going on in that xylem.
But it would be easy to find that information.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Right, right. And we're working on with the growers we have. We need to utilize and capture what their yield data is so that we can put the two pieces of information together. But you're absolutely right on that.
All right, well, Melissa, thank you again.
Okay.
very much.
This next talk's going to be two of us, Dr. Melgar and myself. For some reason, they didn't put Dr. Melgar's name on the program. Sorry.
All right.
In there. Okay.
You're good to go.
As I said, there'll be two of us talking, and hopefully we can get it done in time. Okay, all of you know, you can put a lot of peaches on a tree, but obviously you have to have the right size or sufficient size to market it. So there's that sweet spot. 175 grams is about a 2 3/4 inch peach. So once again, that's why we thin. Hopefully, we have a crop we do want to thin. Windows for thinning peaches, you can do it pre-bloom. I've done it with dormant or vegetable oils, which I'll talk about. You can do it during bloom, which obviously for early varieties and varieties that have trouble sizing, that's when we go in to bloom it in March. And usually we do it by hand, but I'm going to talk about other ways to bloom thin. And then, of course, the fruitlet. We always come in, whether we bloom thin or not, to regulate the crop by hand thinning, usually at the fruitlet stage. I've shown this slide before. There's 3 times when we want to go thin. One is pre-bloom. We do get cellular activity in February, and if you do thin in February, you actually, all the data I have, and I've did it for a number of years, you move your market size, you're up a 1/4 inch or sometimes a 1/2 inch. So it really, of course, you don't normally thin at that time, but it does work because the cell activity is happening then. The time that it's really critical is the next stage is the 30-day period after bloom. At that period is really essential for early varieties and varieties that are small to reduce the crop load as soon as you possibly can, especially if it's a warm 30-day period. And I'll show you a slide or two about that. So that's really the critical period. We got to monitor our temperatures and also the variety. Then typically we come in and do fruitlet thinning, whether you bloom thin or not. So those are 3 times you can thin to regulate your crop load. So why pre-bloom thin, or pre-bloom or bloom thin? Of course, the more flowers at bloom, the more negative the effect of rate of growth on cell division. The first 45 days from bloom on, the peach tree is using reserves. The new leaf production doesn't really have a positive effect on sugar accumulation resources until about 45 days. So first 30 days or so, they're relying totally on stored carbohydrates. The more flowers you have, then the more dilute, less carbohydrates for each flower, and then your cell division. I have a lot of data, which I don't have time to show you, but that's very much true. And the fruitlet competition is also affected by temperature. The rate of growth is during that period of the first 30 days after bloom, temperature can really accelerate cell division, so they use reserves up quicker. And if you still don't have that crop load regulated at that time by flower thinning, it's just lost. You're losing cell size and division and numbers. So when you do finally thin the fruitlets, you can't make that up with water and fertilization. Obviously, if you're going to bloom thin, if you go as much as 50%, that's really ideal. But obviously, sometimes you don't want to thin that much off. But we sort of shoot for that. This is data that I took for over 30 varieties for 5 years, where the cropping was normal. I had fortunately, the grower allowed to see all the pack out. And what we noticed for the first 30 days after bloom, if it was 500 or less growing degree days, you look on the right there, 3 of those years was such. In the pack out, you can see for large size fruit, or at least 2 3/4 inch, he was able to meet that. It was normal thinning. But the 2 years where it was very warm during that period, you can look at the size pack out of this is the average of over 30 varieties. You can see he did not attain 2.5 inches, or had difficulty. So once again, that 30-day period is very essential, and that comes to the point, bloom thinning is very expensive to do, but it's going to be necessary, which some people know. So the market demands large fruit, so obviously here they're bloom thinning by hand, and how costly that is. And I will get into the cost. We did do cost analysis. If you wait this long, obviously a late season large fruited variety, you can do it this late, but obviously you've lost a lot of potential size if you have to do it this late. And just look at the number of fruit. That's even with bats, it's still a lot of intensive labor. Okay, what can you thin with? Well, over my career, we've tried everything that came out. You go down the list, dormant oils, they're still, you can use those. Dormex, we use it for another reason, but it also will thin your buds, and that's also pre-bloom. ATS is ammonium thiosulfate. If you have a sulfur deficiency, or if you want to strengthen your flowers with nitrogen, it works. It also thins your flowers, which is, it's not labeled to do that. Just remember that. Will Thin was labeled, but at the rates that we had to use with it, it just does not work. Turgitol is not labeled, and it can be very hot. I'll show you some data. Now, if you do organic, you have lime sulfur and Crocker's fish oil. Very messy. It does do some work on there. Armathin is a registered surfactant. That's still used in certain places. It's not, of course, we don't use it, but it does work to some extent. At one time, we had Ralix Release, which is a GA inhibitor that we put on the year before, but most growers don't want to start the spring with already only half the flower buds. So that's no longer, there might be a still label, but it's not being used. And then one thing that's been labeled recently, Dr. Melgar will talk about, is the seed. The modes of action when you use oils pre-bloom, they essentially inhibit bud respiration and it suffocates the buds. You got the physical damage during bloom. We use these acid-type compounds, which are some of the ones I mentioned. Then also some of these surfactants inhibit pollen tube growth, and that's how they work. You don't get the pollination, but sometimes it leaves a lot of buttons, and that's one reason we don't use them. Then hormone regulation, the one that you technically could use, we can't, well, it's not labeled ethylene. I'll talk a little bit about that one. GA is you used the year before, and that's your GA inhibitor. Okay, I've done pre-bloom with a number of different things. The trouble with petroleum-based oils, if you get up above 6%, you're going to have some phytotoxicity. So I used a lot of plant-based oils I could find. Problem with them is they don't come with emulsifiers. And I did do a lot of work with soybean oil in the 90s when the soybean board was trying to find a use for soybean oil. It wasn't, it was quite cheap, actually. So I did use that, but the problem was you needed an emulsifier. And that's what raised the cost. So I used a surfactant, and I'll talk about what I used. Okay, I used degummed soybean oil a good bit for a number of years. You got to use degummed, okay, or else you'll gum up your sprayers. But you need the thing, and I've used vegetable oil. I mean, this is some regular oil, which is essentially soybean oil that you can buy for restaurants. The problem, or the issue, is you need to have an emulsifier, and the emulsifier costs more than the oil. And so that really, the cost became a bit high. But we did do a lot of work with, we used Latron for our soybean oil. What we found at 8% seemed to be the sweet spot. You can see on the right, most of the thinning, when I was using dormant oils, was usually on the base. If you look at that shoot, more of the buds are thinned at the base of the shoot. And it's the opposite with some of the other compounds we used. The issue, if you get above 8%, especially this is 12% soybean oil, you tend to, it congregates right at the base of the bud. It does remove the flower bud, but you see the black necrotic area, and you can end up with shoot damage. 10%, not so much. Definitely 8% seems to be the safe amount. This was summer prints, which we all know is difficult to thin because there's so many buds. If you look at the percent soybean oil, when we got to 8%, we started getting around 30%, 25, 30% pre-bloom thin, which is really an ideal amount if you can do that. But 6% wasn't enough, and once we got above 8%, we started having some of that tissue necrosis. Once again, we got the pack out, and if you look at the pack out, if you get summer prints over 2.5 inches on average, that's really good. So once again, 8% worked really well. And we did cost analysis. If you look at, time to go through all this, but we did get reduced. You can see 8% was better than 6% as far as thinning. And if we looked at, this is back in 2002, so cost of labor was much cheaper then, but we still had more than $1,000 net return when labor was a lot cheaper than it is now. So, okay, soybean oil went up in price, and emulsifier got too darn high, so we looked for something else, and we started working with vegetable oil. It says vegetable oil, but the manufacturer told me it's soybean oil, but it does have an emulsifier. It's labeled as an adjuvant, but it's not labeled, quote, as a thinner. Okay, so we looked at that, and we went around 8%, which is approximately 7% oil, which would be 7% soybean oil. And we did get, on this here is fire prints, we did get pretty good thinning, and even though it was, the spray obviously cost some money, if you look on the far right, 935 liters is 100 gallons per acre. So at 100 gallons per acre, we came out pretty well, at least that particular year, versus 3% dormant oil, which was the traditional for scale control. So it looked pretty good there. Let's see here. Okay, Cresthaven, which has a lot of buds, it also same thing. I tried it at different concentrations. Once again, if you get up to 10% vegetable oil, which is 9% soybean oil, we overthinned, okay. But at 8%, we actually got a nice thinning response compared to just the normal dormant oil treatments. Contender, one thing different, I added ethafon, and it really, first of all, 10% vegetable oil did thin it a bit too hard, and then 10% vegetable oil with some ethafon over-thinned. But the point is, it does work. It will, once again, you have to be very good with your sprayers. You got to make sure you calibrate everything correctly. So we did try a little bit with ethafon. Well, this is ethyl, but essentially the ingredient you're looking for is ethafon, and there's a lot of cheap ethafon products out there. Ethyl is one of the most expensive, but there's much more cheaper stuff. Looking at, well, this is Contender. We looked at 100 parts per million and 150. Adding ethafon did two things. It did delay bloom. That's what is in red there. It did delay bloom when we mixed it with oil. And it definitely flower thin. But once again, when we want to do pre-bloom, we want only about 30%. And you can see it's 60, 70% with when you added ethafon. So not what we wanted exactly at that rate. Same rates with Cresthaven. Once again, it delayed bloom, but also thinned more than 30%. So you could go, much lower with ethafon, but we didn't have time. We didn't get to that point where possibly you can still get the bloom delay and not thin so many buds. When you make a mistake, I don't know whose fault this was, Jason, maybe ours. We ended up getting double the ethafon on, and when you overthin with ethafon, you get shoot death, or it takes all the buds off on the terminal part of the shoot. Well, as I said before, with oil, it's usually the basal buds. So if you get something like this, it's obviously something you don't want. I won't go over this, but in blue, I just essentially with vegetable oil, once again, I'm using it instead of the regular degummed soybean oil. It does reduce flower buds 20 to 40% at rates of 7 to 9% soybean oil concentration, which is 8 to 10% vegetable oil. So it does work. But once again, it's an adjuvant. It's not labeled as a, quote, a bud thinner. So in red, just looking red, if you can thin 30% of the flower buds during winter, you will increase your fruit size on difficult to size cultivars without blossom thinning. So if you can't get into blossom thinning, this will knock it down to a point where you'll still get a size increase. Once again, ethafon is not labeled for this. It does thin, and you have to be careful if you use it. And once again, soybean oil and other vegetable oils, if you pre-bloom thin, they tend to take off the buds at the base. Ethafon takes off the distal buds. Okay, chemical bloom thinning. This is when you have the flowers out. This is data from a number of varieties we looked at. And first of all, you got to know your variety. Some varieties have low flower bud density. Others have, I guess, your normal. And then some have very high. And Summer Prince is one that has very high flower bud density. So you have to consider that if you're doing bloom thinning work. Summer prints, the problem I had with it is this is you can see the staggered bloom on one shoot of a summer print. So you'd almost have to bloom thin it twice if you're going to use chemicals, because it has a long, drawn out, has high density flower buds also. Turgidol was hot for a while. People wanted to use it. It's not labeled, so we won't even talk about it, but it did thin. ATS was once labeled as thin set. We thought we could use it, but I think that I can't find that label anymore. But that's your ammonium thiosulfate, and it does, I think it works pretty well. Lime sulfur, if you're doing organic, and wheel thin was labeled for thinning, and at the rate that they asked us to use, it just wasn't enough. We ended up with a lot of buttons, and that really, it's hard to come back and fruitlet thin when you know half of them are going to stay on its buttons. We won't get into Turgidol, but it worked pretty well. One problem with Turgidol and some of these is they'll damage the peduncle, okay? And you think you have pollination, but then the fruit will abscess a lot later than you want, and then you end up with having less fruit than you thought. And that is one issue with some of these bloom thinners. You get a little leaf injury, but I've never had really problems with the leaves not developing. Now, ATS, it's not labeled as a flower thinner. I know in Texas, when they have sulfur deficiencies, it works great at bloom. It takes care of the sulfur efficiency, and it does desiccate flower parts, so you do get a thinning effect. Often, really best for ATS to fertilize, you need to do it probably 2 times. And you do not want to use a surfactant, because that overdoes things. We did a trial with comparing it with wheel thin. I won't get into rates right now, but essentially the results for several years was a multiple ATS application was more effective than a single application during the bloom period. And the problem with wheel thin tends to leave more buttons. If you want good results, you had to go above the labeled rate. Okay, mechanical thinning. Rope thinners. Rope thinners were tried a good bit at one time. And this is Brown out of Michigan. He developed this for peaches. It overthins. First of all, it's kind of hard to, it's a heavy system that bring through the orchard, but it does overthin. It's very uneven thinning. It's just not practical for peach. I haven't seen it practical. My next speaker is going to show you a lot of different things from Europe, but this is a flower thinner. It's not Darwin, but if you have a planar system where you just have, not three-dimensional system, you can use these things, and they're very efficient. And I will talk a little bit about one that we did work on. USDA came out with these spike thinners. They were used for citrus. They're mostly used if you definitely have, if you didn't get around to thinning and you don't have a shaker to shake the extra fruit off, they'll do that. But it wasn't effective as a bloom thinner, and for a lot of reasons, but there is better models out there now. So it comes down to hand-operated flower thinners. A lot of those came out maybe 20 years ago. Everyone's going to try to use those, and they work, but they're heavy. They require also battery. She has a battery pack on her back, and that thing is not light. I've used it. Phil Miller, who's here exhibiting, he came up with something a little bit light model, but once again, you see the backpack, he has to have a battery, and battery life is really the main issue besides fatigue. So growers have innovated and come up with smaller drills where they have mobile charging. You have the charger on back of a pickup, and you just keep on changing, your battery pack when it runs, and it's a very low-tech but very efficient system. Okay, what's out there? Something like the Darwin string thinner. We did a lot of work on that when it first came out. It's nice. There's a lot of adjustments, not just the tractor and the spindle feed, but also your string arrangements. So there's a lot of flexibility with this system. You can have different windows. You can want to thin more on top, on bottom. There's a lot of things you can do. You can move those cords, those lines, horizontal lines. Those are cords. They're 50 centimeter or 20-inch cords. On the left, you can see the anchor. You can move that 135 degrees. There's a lot of movement allowed. The spindles, the length, we used a 2.5 meter, but you can use a 3 meter, and I think there's a 2 meter. And then, of course, the hydraulic motor, it's very variable speed. But you can see we worked with open center trees, and that's going to be a big headache. We couldn't get between the orchards, or between the rows, because, you know, the mature trees, we almost covering the whole way across the row middle. So you would have to modify your pruning and training, which I think is pretty obvious. Also, we ban those cords. That you can see a little bit of the orange, red, orange, black cords. They are a problem. If you're banding your trees, you don't want to put the Darwin in there. I mean, it takes a long time to unravel that mess. The other thing is, if you do open center, which is what we had to use with, the pruning has to be very precise. If you have subscaffolds out of range, out of sorts, you end up catching the spindle and you end up breaking them, and it makes a huge mess. So it's another reason we don't do it with open center. We did do it on Y trees, so that works very nice. Just as far as string thinner, we try to shoot for around 50% flower removal. And if you look at these varieties, the spindle rotation, we were trying to find what's the best spindle rotation, and we went between 200 and 225. That worked well with our size trees, and that gave us around 50% flower removal. Tractor speeds also, you got to keep that in mind. If you go at 2 miles per hour, and you still go with 200 spindle speed, you end up doubling what you take off. So the slower you go, the faster your speed has to be, or else you're going to, no, the slower your speed has to be. The faster you go, the faster your speed has to be. In other words, your tractor speed does make a difference. You got to realize that. This is just some data showing before is in the amount of flowers. You know, a lot of shoots had more than 30 flowers on. Then after going through one pass, it really knocks down a lot of the excess flowers and it spreads out your flowers throughout the canopy. Flower removal, once again, more you remove, the more likely you're going to strip shoots totally. So you don't want any naked shoots that have no fruit. So what we found, if you shoot for 50% flower removal, you'll usually only have less than 5% of your shoots that will have no flowers at all. So you got to keep that in mind also when you're working with that. The trials that we ended up doing, we ended up using 225 RPMs for the spindle speed. We went at the slow speed. Once again, because we were doing open center trees, very difficult to do. So we did do another orchard. We did do perpendicular V's, and they worked very nice on perpendicular V's. So once again, it's the way the system's pruned. But at that, this was back in 2011. The adverse wage was $9.12. We talked to a number of growers, and Greg Henderson knew some and saw their cost, and they said initial 35% on top of that wage is what their real cost was of labor. And so we used a figure of $12.27 per hour for thinning. And when we compared it to what the control was hand bloom thinning as well as comeback green fruit thinning. What in T1 is where we use 4 passes, 2 passes on the sides and 2 passes on the interior of open center. So we had to take 4 passes versus just 2 passes, which is T2. And you can see both passes or both systems reduced our thinning cost tremendously. And that included coming back and hand thinning afterwards. But from what that shows us, we really only need to go pass twice, one on each side of the tree down the row. Gross revenue was once again it was pretty close, but once again, labor was a lot cheaper then, but just doing the 2 passes really, came out ahead. The issue is with the Darwin, with open center, you only need 20 acres a day, and it's very hard on the operator, plus Darwin is not made for open center trees. We had to re-weld parts of it, and then catching into subscaffolds, so you don't use it with open center trees, I'll just say that. If we didn't have those issues, we could really go a lot faster. We can do 40 acres per, if it's a V system or just a single fruiting wall system. So for what's coming up, which you can hardly wait, it's 1608 is what our cost will be for H2A, and add about 35%, and you're up to around $21 plus per hour. So in 2011, it was $5 a tree to hand bloom and follow up green fruit thinning, versus 2.9 or almost $3 a tree using the Darwin. Based on these costs, to hand thin and follow up fruit thin, an acre of about 140 live trees might cost as much as almost $9 a tree, or $1,200 an acre, and that's very high cost. So we obviously yesterday cost, everyone heard knows what the cost is to do thinning. So more of the summary, the Darwin does work. It doesn't work in the system though that we have in South Carolina. Wish we can make it that way. It does reduce labor costs. It was very economical back in 2011, so 13, 14 years later, the cost of labor has gone much more than back then. So tractor costs have not gone quite up that much. You got to have the optimal spindle and tractor speeds, obviously, and all that is easy to work with something like the Darwin, but the training cannot be open center. It's just not going to work. If you're willing to go to a V system or go to a single planer system, it works great. So once again, in the past, we tried to make the Darwin work with the type of tree training we had. Obviously, for that mechanized training to work, you have to actually tailor your tree training to the type of machine you're going to use. And these are some of the farms and people that really helped over the years. I really appreciate all the work that the industry provided, because we couldn't do that type of work, get that type of pack out on our research farm. So getting the pack out data was very illuminating and very, very valuable. And with that, our next speaker. Well, don't clap yet. No.
Yeah, the show hasn't ended. So yeah, I'm going to continue with the last part of this presentation on our experiences with Accede, this new plant growth regulator. Accede is ACC, which is a molecule, it's a precursor that occurs naturally in trees, in plants. It's a precursor of ethylene, which is the hormone that causes abscission. Like when you see leaves falling, or when you see fruit naturally falling, that's because of ethylene. So in the biosynthesis of ethylene, the previous step, it's ACC or Accede. So it's the first commercially available thinner based on a naturally occurring compound, because ethaphone, for example, is a synthetic compound. And so it has been used successfully for apples, and it has been labeled also now for peaches, for thinning. So again, I was mentioning it's the ACC, and once you apply Accede, the ethylene production happens like between 2 or 3 days later. So that's when you expect to have the maximum effect. And then after that, over the next 10 days, it starts declining or reducing to levels of before applications. And yeah, one of the differences with, like, for example, comparing with ethaphone is that it doesn't cause gummosis in peaches. So we we did several trials in the upstate, in the ridge, with different species, and that's it's labeled for bloom thing, and so I'm going to tell you what we did and what we found out. In the ridge, we tried, here in South Carolina, we tried 4 cultivars, summer prints, one of the hardest to thin, as Dr. Rieger said, Carol King, June prints, and scarlet prints. They were all open vase, but June prints and scarlet prints were younger trees. They were in the 2nd year of production, I believe. And we used 3 treatments: control, 300 ppm, and then another treatment with 2 applications of 300 ppm. The label says that the recommended rates are between 300 ppm and 600 ppm. So this is this is in the lower end of the application recommended application rate. Then in the upstate, we used harvester and early August prints. But here we went to higher concentrations. We used 600, 800, and 1200 ppm, and with different nozzles, so different application volumes. We applied at bloom time, and you can see down here on the ground already, like a couple of days after application, or even a day after application, you already see all the petals. That's kind of like the first thing, you know? But then immediately, in 3 or 4 days, you can go back and see that the flower is it's gone. We did measure, but I didn't want to put it here because in the end there were no significant differences. Number of fruits that like we were counting in shoots, the number of fruits that we have, and didn't see any difference between control or exceed at 300 ppm. Among these 4 cultivars, the only differences that we saw was the time spent at thinning. Like we had 3 workers, told them just thin them as you normally do. We measured time, and again, June prints and scarlet prints were smaller trees. That's why you can see they took less time than for summer prints in Carole King. But scarlet prints was the only one where we were able to see some reduction in time, even though again, like when counting, I think we did like 20 shoots and counting the number of fruits, we did not see any difference. So pretty disappointed at 300 ppm concentration. Then in the upstate, we had this orchard where we had 2 rows of harvester and early August prints. Here again, we went to these higher concentrations, 600, 800, 1200. You can see that there are 2 600. The difference is that the regulate, the surfactant, was at a higher application rate in this treatment 5. And for the 2 1200 ppm, the difference is the nozzle. We had a higher amount volume, 100 gallons per acre for this treatment 6. Everything was done with a nerve blaster. And again, like next time we came there, we started seeing that the flowers were knocked down. So some of the numbers here, we did see differences for fruit number. For 3 of the treatments in harvester, this is the 800 ppm, 600 ppm, and 1200 ppm, they had significantly lower fruit number. So that worked well. And then for early August prints, the 2 concentrations of the 2 treatments at 600 ppm worked well. The difference is that this one again was 6 fluid ounces of regulate, and this one was 12. So what we can conclude from here is that at 300 ppm, we did not see any clear effect in pretty much any of the treatments. We did have a consistent reduction in fruit number at 600 ppm, again, in both varieties. However, we did not have data on fruit quality or yield. That's something that we can do. Now, something I also want to mention here is that, we had a visitor from Spain, and he told me how they were using Axeed at, even though the label does not include that, they were trying with using it with not bloom applications, but after post-bloom. Issue, of course, it has, it's phytotoxic, so it drops the fruit, but it also drops the leaves. And that's why the company doesn't want you to apply after bloom, because it will knock out the leaves. Based on his experience, he told us that the leaves came back and that was okay. So Andy, I don't know if Andy, are you here today or not? He's outside. Okay. He showed me data. He has been working on it this past year in 2024. And I didn't want to include the data here because it's his data. But he's fine with us talking about it. He did it at post-bloom, and he got between 40 and 70% of thinning, which is really good. But again, it causes damage on the leaves. So it is something that we need to do more research and see, evaluate that damage. It is, as I said, it is labeled as a bloom thinner. And even though the label says it's a thinning agent, I mean, what we see it right now, it's as a thinning helper. You're not going to be able to, at any rate, get your thinning done just with a chemical or 2 chemical applications. It is something that eventually could help with thinning, but you're going to go back and do hand thinning. And again, here I just want to acknowledge Titan Farms, Big Smile, Kenny Potitz, and then Andy Rollins as well. And if you have any questions, I don't know if we have time now or if we'll do it later.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. It's the first time that I am visiting this state, so a pleasure. My name is Ignacio Iglesias. I appreciate the invitation from the organization, also for Greg. It's a pleasure. As I said, I will talk about this, how to manage the efficiency of the orchard of peach based in our experience in Spain. As you can see here, there will be only very few contents. I will put the focus mainly in this part, as you can see here in this part, how we can manage this change from goblet basis to bidimensional, but most of the information will be about mechanization, is what Greg asked to me, put the focus on mechanization, and I want to explain our experience. So I know that is different from all other states, but it's our experience in Spain, okay? This is our company, Agronomical. I am the technical manager. We have a company located in 11 subsidiaries over the world. The closest here is Florida. Also, we have 1 subsidiary in California and Oregon. And in total, we produce about 80 million trees per year, most of them by in vitro culture. This is our main specialization. And we are very well known around the world because, as you can see in the bottom part, nowadays it's close to 400,000 hectares managed in super high density in olive. So this has been 30 years ago like a revolution in the olive sector. Okay, so this is our proposal based on the data that we have from the breeders, from the genomics, and from the academy. We propose to the growers different training systems. As you can see, there are 2 main factors. One, all the systems that we propose are planter canopies, because a better accessibility of the canopy. And the second one is intensive orchards to get the early yields. I think these 2 words for me are very, very important. Planter canopies, accessibility, and intensification. In fact, is exactly what happened in the apple for the last 40 years. So it's nothing new. So just 2 words about peach peach production in Europe. As you can see here, Spain produces around 1.5 million tons per year. So it means the half of the European Union and the second in the world after China. We are nowadays around 70,000 hectares. We lost 10,000 hectares over the last 10 years because the crisis of the prices after the veto of Russia. But now is more balanced, the production and the consumption. And here is where we are. Greg knows very well our country. Some of you know very well. It's like a desert. It's a full desert. 300 mils per year of precipitation. Big orchards, 1,000 hectares, 2,300 hectares. Is some ones, but most of them are familiar. It means in between 20 and 40 hectares per company. And you can see here how we manage the new orchards. A full set of hail nets, planter canopies with all the systems of intelligent irrigation. This, you can see how our soils completely different the ones of Virginia we were discussing yesterday. So the pH is around 8.5, very poor soils. So we have a very different soil from here. So this is the most innovation that we did over the last 20 years. We registered 120 varieties, new varieties, all of them full color, as you can see here. And this is a problem for us because it's very difficult to manage the harvest data. And then having this innovation that is spectacular over the last years, the pitch consumption decreased by the half. So I have no time to discuss about that. Perhaps in the table run we can discuss. But one of the factors is these high color varieties. And also, of course, when we move to these big farms, how you can manage accurately the harvest time with 1,000 hectares with not specialized work. This is the other problem that we have. So we have a lot of challenges. I will summarize briefly. For us, the labor, of course, the main challenge is always the same. The prices of the fruit is constant, and the cost increase more than the prices. This is global. The main problem in Europe is the lack of labor. 100% of people in Spain working in pitch are immigrants. 100%, not 95%. This is one big problem. All the European regulations are crazy, so it's one of the most problems that we have in Spain. Perhaps you heard about the Green Deal, Farm to Fork strategy. We should reduce as 50% the inputs over the last 5 years. This is obligatory for the European Union. We lost 30% of the new chemicals over the last 10 years. You see the reduction of the chemicals 10 years ago and now. So it's huge, that the reduction. We don't have tools to control. We have the decrease of consumption, and at the end we have the climate change. So it's a complication, extremely complication of in which situation we are. I have no time to explain, but yesterday night we were discussing about the labor. You can see how huge are the differences per hour between Tunisia or Washington or France or Lleida. So 10 times, 5 times different the cost in these countries that are competing a lot with Spain. We receive a lot of products from Morocco, from Tunisia, with the labor that is the half or 1/3. So this is another problem that we have. So at the end I will put the focus on that, which is the cost partition in pitch. Yeah, I just to mention, for a mid-season variety, this is the partition of the cost, which is the conclusion. Half of the cost is labor. Okay, you can see here. So this is harvest, thinning, and pruning. Half of the cost is this, and the other important part is plant protection. So these are the two main costs that we have. So for us, the cost for the mid-season variety is 43 cents, and you can see here the cost per hectare is around 17,000 euros per hectare. It's a huge cost, of course. And you can see. Okay, it's better like this. So you can see here how the cost increased over the last years and how the prices are over the last 20 years. So it's something very different. You see the trend is completely different. The question is how we can do all these operations that requires a lot of time in a more efficient way. Is the answer that I will give you now, this question. So what we did in other species, and mainly apple or pear or cherry, we did exactly this. So I hope in the future our orchards will be something like this in the future. Otherwise, will be very difficult to be efficient with this type of orchards. We start the change over 20 years ago, and I will show you now some aspects of this. This is how we manage the stone-free production in Spain. 90% or 80% is open base, not European base. 4 meters. It's almost a pedestrian open base. You can see the people here. So it's a small, it's the Spanish Catalan base, Spanish or Catalan base. So this is apricots, this is plums, cherries. The open base is the main, but we have one thing that you don't have, is the growth regulator pacobutrazole. It's the culture, you can see here. So it's very cheap, 20 euros per hectare a year. Half a liter is enough to control perfectly the trees. You can see how perfect is the control of the trees. So we don't know how until when we will have, but we have applied this product over the last 28 years. Only Spain in Europe can apply this product. I think this is one of the most interesting problems. What will happen the day that we lose the culture? Well, with this, because you need to consider that in this open basis, we use only mid to high vigor rootstocks. So this is the important to point out. So the day that we lost the culture, we will have a big problem. So we need to be thinking on the new rootstocks to control the vigor. You can see here the shoots, 2 meters long. We have a long season, we have water, we have conditions, so the tree is growing very fast. So let's compare what means intensification. This is the standard. I am here, so 4 meters more or less. It is not a huge goblet, which is our proposal. Over the last 20 years, we have working a lot on this type of orchards. You can see the difference. Is one more important difference is how the machine can access to here or here. So is the canopy accessibility, because we changed the architecture of the tree. This is the main change, but another important thing is we look the volume of the canopy, look here, 16,000 cubic meters, we reduce to the half, to have the same yield. So it means the canopy is twice as efficient with this look in vegetative period. I am here. It's not a pedestrian orchard. Even using culture, sometimes it's not possible to control the vigor. And this is the problem. If you go to the bidimensional planar canopy, in this case is with Rupak 40, you can see how perfect is the control of the vigor. So when we are going to apply the pesticides, we started a lot of years ago with these trees. After we moved to these small gobelets, let's say the small gobelets, but still we have a lot of drift. So the last years we are moving to these systems in pear, in apple and peach. You see how efficient is the control. And we are implementing the last 10 years with our clients. This is in Italy, the side-by-side treatments. And we are implementing this now in the last years in pear. This is in Germany, in apples, because we reduce the time 60%, because we do 6.5 times in each side, and we also are doing the same in pear. This is in Spain. So this is the progress. It's important to see how the decrease of drift we have from 65 of drift to 15% of drift. You can see here the canopy volume. But the important is how we can reduce the volume per hectare. It's huge. We reduce more than the half. So the cost of the application will reduce by the half. And we, from the point of view of environment, you can see the difference between here, we lost the half, we lost nothing. I think this is the most important advance that we have. So our proposals started 20 years ago. The first change that we always explain to the growers is go to bidimensional. With the same rootstock, we can go from goblet to bidimensional using the same rootstock, GF677 or Garnem. And with the next step, go for intensification. This is the consecutive steps we are applying over the last years. You can see here the tree density per hectare, 600, 1,000, 2,000. Of course, the intensification is to plant more trees per hectare. So if we put in this range of vigor, as you can see here, you are using probably a lot of the Guardian or Atlas or whatever. So we are moving in this part. Of course, using these rootstocks, we can go for planar canopies, of course, but using this size control roasting, we can go for axis, for B-axis, or for a small goblet. So you have different options to use. So we put a lot of focus on the root packs. It's a genetics developed by Agronomical over the last 20 years. We have a lot of experience. I will explain some data. And luckily, we have 2 new rootstocks, very interesting. One from Irta, is Intensia, one from Theta, Pillow Red, with a range of vigor between Rupak 40 and Rupak 20, so more or less like Controller 6. We have new, these 2 new rootstocks. This is, for example, is an 8 years old Noraxila Rupak 40. You see 3.7 by 1.1. You can see how perfect is the line. And of course, the easy thing is to train in central axis. So which is the benefit of this intensification? You can see here, this is 2 varieties, okay? This has been published, so I will have the presentation if you want, no problem. See, when we are going to the intensification, what happens? We produce earlier. When we compare the base with the central axis, you can see the difference. In 2 years, we produce twice. So this difference is maintained to the end. Look, in the 7 year, we produce 100 tons more per hectare. Why? Because we advance the production. This is the principle of intensification. We have a lot of data with Rupak 40. For us, it's the best rostock because it increases yield efficiency. But of course, in the first peak, we increased a lot the fluids, and we have even better size. So we have full data of the rostock. Is very important for early varieties. So you can see here, this is another Rupak. In the 4 year, the tree is finished. You can see the yields that we have in late varieties in between 60 and 70 tons per hectare. This is the objective that we are easy for us. And for us, it's very important to have the full crop in the 4 year, okay? And to have an accumulative yield in the 3rd year from 60 to 80 tons per hectare. So this is the numbers that we are managing with these intensive orchards. So this is the proposal. Of course, when we move from 3D to 2D, we have different options, as you can see here, and we'll explain you these options. So this is a trial what we started years ago. You can see the axis, the B-axis, the 3-axis, the Guyo tree, as in apple. And it's important to see the first question is how many labor we require for each combination. Very low labor, more, and more. So more axis, more labor for training the first 2 years. This is the labor for training the first 2 years. But another important question is, which will be the cumulative yield in the 5 years? Look, the cumulative yield. So more trees per hectare, more cumulative yield, decreasing and increasing again. I think there are very important data about the system, and this is the cost of for establish the orchard, the cost of the trees from 10,000 decreasing to 3,000. I think based on this data for the future orchards, we are convinced that the axis and B-axis will be the most important systems. About pruning, just I put the numbers here of the cost that we have in Spain for the manual pruning or for the mechanical pruning. This is the how we manage. We have another option also. You can see here is a family farm, only 2 people with pneumatic scissors. Very easy to train the trees, very easy. With a small ladder, they can reach the top. So you can see how easy it is to manage this type of trees. So there is a new technology from Poland that in this case this new machine is just to cut the vertical branches and is developed starting for apple. We will test this year for peaches. This new machine from Poland is very, very innovative for this new approach of winter pruning. After we go to summer pruning, before harvest always, you can see one of the machines with 2 blades, as you can see here. This is another one with the Alex system. There are different options. Both are working very well, very efficiently. You can see here the double blade. You will see the retractile after. You see here the net. Okay, so it's working very well. This is after the summer pruning. It's quite perfect. So you see how the fruiting wall is established, and this is the final another option with the disc. Is for bigger branches. We use also this system. You can see how we manage. It's less than 2 hours per hectare, the time that we required, and you can go for the both sides in the meantime, and we can use this machine for the winter pruning. So we use a lot of advantages using this machine. You see how it's perfect. For me, this is the key, of these systems. Like into the canopy is perfectly achieving the canopy. So for the next year, the bud formation is excellent, and also the fruit quality is excellent because the light distribution is perfect, okay? So doing this with the summer pruning, we reduce the winter pruning by 30% because we did as a pre-pruning, okay? Let's go to the mechanization. We can do this work by pneumatical browsers. You know, this is not new for us, but this is how we do by hand. All this we do by the machine. See the difference of the cost. Greg explained it very well, the data. I will escape the data, but this is one option that we use a lot. This is another option. The name is the diffuse. This technology can be used for gobelets or for central axis, but is more efficient. Of course, you can see here in a gobelet. That could be useful for you, this system, because in gobelet the Darwin is not working well. You can see the problem is always is not arriving to the middle of the open base, never. So it's less efficient than the Darwin, of course. This is a new technology from Rinieri, from Italy, that is in horizontal arms and is able to fit very well in the internal part of the canopy, as you will see later. We're using this for apple also. You can see how it works. It's not in vertical, it's work in horizontal. You will see a detail now of how the cords are working. You can see here. So it's very efficient in these canopies that are not as planar as I supposed before. We can move also the orientation. Okay. So there is so which is I have no time to go for the details, but with the traditional manual hand thinning to the mechanical plus manual, we can reduce more or less 1,000 euros per hectare. This is the balance that Greg explained. So the benefit is huge. This is also the increase of fruit quality using the flower thinning, the mechanical flower thinning. We know that we increase fruit quality because there is less fruits in the first stages. Let's go to the harvest. So this is how we manage the harvest with these trains of beans, but it's not easy to reach the canopy in this volume. And this is how we propose, one of the proposals is to using the platform. The platforms are the same that we use for apples, exactly the same. You can see here again the cost, difference of the cost. This is in fact is the how many kilos per hour. Doing this, we increase by 2 the kilos per hour. So we are double efficient. So there is another possibility, going this power canopy, with a small loader to reach the part of the tree and the train of beans from the ground. This is a very efficient technology, it's very, very fast. And the last one is doing the harvest from the ground. We take the pitches and you see this planar canopy. We put to the beans, okay? And then the bottom part of the tree, we use a very single platform. This is the one that we use for thinning or for harvest. Is this platform that is very single, and we use for harvest, for thinning, and for pruning. We use 3 times per year, okay? So at the end, all this mechanization, with data of 2022, we reduce per hectare 2,800 euros. If you go to the details, as you can see here, this has been published. You will have this information. You see the concepts where we are reducing. So mainly is in fruit thinning, in pruning, in harvest, and in plant protection. So this is the benefit, the net benefit per hectare, okay? And it's important to know this, that is also very important. You see how many hours we need per hectare in open base, 651, and in the central axis. So we reduce the labor by 40%. That is very important. So, of course, this opened the window to the robotics in the future. We did the first trials in California, in HC Farms, for robotic harvest. This is HC Farms. They are using these planar systems, and started 2 years ago to test the table system. I think you know most of you
There's a
this
very particular way
technology
that
from
we have to
Israel
harvest our
is the
fruits,
drones
and
that are flying
the way that it attaches
taking
and is able to
the
remove
peaches from
the fruit
from the
is
tree,
very gentle,
and the
allows
peaches is
the fruit to get
how
off the
many time
tree
I
and
have?
into the bin that we're
5
picking
minutes?
into in a much safer fashion.
5 minutes, okay. I will go. This is the real situation we have. You can see here how difficult. It's not easy. You see how it's trying to pick the apple. It's not always easy for apple. So it's how it seems all working. It's a new technology, interesting. So I have only 5 minutes. I will finish in 5 minutes. So if you are worried about how much is the structure of support, don't worry. This is a 3-axis with 0 support structure. We can manage without. Oh, this is another case with a very single structure of support. It's only one wire here, a metallic support here. That's all. So you can do a planner very cheap. Of course, we can go to be more full set. This is the most expensive orchard that we have, 50,000 euros per hectare, B-axis, 3.1 by 1, and high net in the orchard. This is the most expensive. This is the full set. This is how we manage in this perfect orchard. This is how we manage the thinning with the Darwin, as we saw before. This is how important it is to keep the structure well attached, otherwise the Darwin is moving the leaf. So this is one of the examples of the most competitive orchard. We visited with Greg when he was in Spain. The objective is to have with flat pitches around 60 tons per hectare with extra high quality. And the other people, the other growers that never want to use the planter systems, we have a proposal. It's a very small goblet, pedestrian, from the ground. And this is the option of this pedestrian goblet. And of course, we have developed this machine just to open in the middle at this center to light penetration. And it's very efficient for all the stone fruits. We reduce a lot the cost of pruning in winter, and this is the system that we developed. So let's go to the end. Just to finish, I think we are here in the 30 years ago, we were here. Now we are here. So what we do in the future for this sustainable intensification that the FAO is explaining more and more, and the European Union is the roadmap of the European Union, we need to do more sustainable with the better use of input. So we need to do more with less. I think all the people agree on that. And we said this in Spain, is a very popular phrase that we have. So we have developed the first orchards, is what we say the intelligent digital orchards. The first one are in Spain and Italy. You see our model orchard, or intelligent orchard, this is in Italy, where all is with monitorization and digitalization. No tractors inside the orchard, planter canopies, as you can see, sensors that before were explained, and with this the full data that we have with these orchards. And of course, this is fantastic. We have developed the models for disease protection, for scab, for monilla, for all these crops. So I think this will be the key for the future. And what about training system? I think that is obvious. The world is moving to these systems. Of course, we are in this part. In apple, we are a bit more far away. For example, this is an apple orchard in the third year. We have 65 tons per hectare. This is in Italy with a multi-leader weir system. It's spectacular, the quality, the high output is those orchards. We are trying to do something in peach. We have the first trials in Spain. It's working quite well, but not as good as in apple. And at the end, we can do, if we go for these planner systems, of course, we can go for digitalization. This is the company AgerPix. You are using the system to forecast the yield per row, per tree, per hectare, and this is very important for big farms. We are using a commercial scale, and of course, we got a lot of innovation with drones, with cell automotive machines. This is what I am finishing in, I think, 1 minute or. This is a very nice approach. This is Sophia system from Netafim. What is doing? All the chemicals are applied by the over the row. no tractors inside the orchards, because in Italy, most of the orchards are very empty, cannot go with the tractor, and this is very useful. And this is the Sophia from Netafim. This is the gas, you know, this option from California. We start using in Europe the autonomous gas system. You know, this company is owned by John Deere over the last years. And this is an innovative system that we start developing in Europe. There are 4 options for autonomous tractors. And as I said, the most important labor consuming is the harvest. You can imagine here, Italy, 70 years ago, 14 meters. We reduced a bit in Oregon, and we are now in Spain, in Lleida, or in Europe with very small trees and planar canopies. And the planar canopies are the ideal for the robotics. I think for the future, the robotics will be something like this. This is the most advanced that we have nowadays. This is the advanced farm. Perhaps you know this technology. It's very efficient. We have the last Washington State 1 month ago. In Duncan Brothers, we used 4 machines to pick the apples in this planar, that should be planar system, so otherwise never will work this combination. I think it's the most advanced nowadays, but remember, it requires very planar system. Okay? This is how it works, very efficiently. You see, it can pick close to 30 tons per day, working 10 hours, 20 hours, 3 seconds per apple. This is the most advanced that we have nowadays. Okay, let's go for the conclusions. You have here all the conclusions. For me, the important key is the labor. So just to thinking that all this innovation is not possible without three-dimensional canopies. So we need bidimensional canopies. Intensification is the key, of course. You see in apple, in pear, in cherry, is what they did 40 years ago, the intensification and the plant canopies. And then mechanization is the only way to reduce labor. I think this is the message that we have from our experience in Spain. And I repeat, this our experience, our data, but I think this information can be helpful for you for your future orchards. So thank you very much. This information you will have if you are interested to the data. We published a very interesting book with Greg and colleagues and Zenia. There is 2 articles in English that can have this the full information. So thank you very much. I think I have it in time more or less.
You're
Yeah.
good. You're
Okay.
good. You're good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And
Not for fruit. Ornamentals, yeah. But
You may have to repeat the question if I...
question was, is cultivar labeled for fruit in the U.S.? No. We used it 40 years ago, but especially in pecans, but no. We couldn't get a label. So there's similar stuff like apogee with apples, things that work the same way, but cultivar is has a high residual. The half-life is too high for EPA to allow it to be used with fruit trees.
With the traditional versus the 2D, how many times do you normally have to pick a variety?
Yeah. I think if we manage well the canopy, because it's important, the summer pruning, the green pruning, and the winter pruning to manage perfectly. If we manage this, as you said, you saw in this picture, if most of the varieties with 2 picking times is enough. So for the late varieties, we can do in 1 time, and for the early varieties, we need 2 times. But we compare with the open base. In the open base with traditional varieties, not high color varieties, we need to go for 4 times. So we reduce by the half the picking times that we go into the orchard. Why? Because I have no time to explain, because if you see the light distribution inside the canopy is completely different when we compare the open base with the planar systems. We have a lot of experience in apples and pear in peaches that is affecting the light distribution, improving the light distribution in the canopy, okay? And I have a comment about the culture. I think it's important, this comment, because if you remember, I don't know if here in US, we have in Europe the CCC for pear. Remember the Psychocell?
Yeah.
I don't know if you still have. What happened in Spain, we lost in Europe, the CCC 18 years ago. We lost, was not registered anymore. And in Spain, we have an important variety, was Blanquilla, very vigorous. When we lost the CCC, we lost the variety. So for us in Spain, there is a lot of concern that will happen when we lost the culture. We don't know when we will lose the culture. 15 years ago, when we started a trial of roostocks, they say, we will lose the culture. 17 years ago, the culture is still registered. But remember that is only in Spain. And the culture, we have a lot of experience, but if you manage well, there is a high-risk product because we collapse orchards of cherries and peaches if we don't manage well. But fortunately, we have 28 years experience. We manage perfectly, always by drip irrigation, always. Because doing that, also you can have never residual on the fruit because it's a hydrolyzation of the culture in the ground, in water and CO2. So never you will find residual in the fruit because this characteristic. I think is the most spectacular product in the history of the fruit production for me. Is anything compared to this product?
We won't get that. We won't get it registered, but that's why you can rely on rootstocks. And he does have rootstocks that can do that. So in our conditions where we can't control the water, we can get very vigorous growth. So without coal tar, we have to rely on rootstocks and probably an extra summer pruning. And Chris's question about how many picks you do, if you get the canopy more uniform, you don't have to pick as often. You won't have to pick 7 times. You might pick 3 times. My experience.
Greg, I had a comment. You mentioned during the chemical thinning, it sparked a thought. 4 or 5 years ago, we switched over to doing the 200 gallons per acre of dormant oil on unpruned trees. And then for us, large farms, sometimes I've got to do my second application before we prune. And so I'm doing double. So 200 gallons, then again 200 gallons. And it sparked, when you said something about buttoning, we have seen more buttoning in the last 3 to 5 years than ever across multiple varieties. It normally doesn't button. Could that process be contributed to that?
Yeah, so you're putting total of 6% on, and with that amount of water, you're getting very good coverage. I don't want to say it's causing that, but oil, when I worked with it, when I got around 6%, I saw some bud mortality and things like that. But it was actually, 30% is pretty good, but thinning you'd want. But it's when you start getting twig, necrosis, and obviously it gets a little dangerous. Okay, so that's why. But as far as the buttoning, when you put that oil on, you are suffocating also the buds to some extent, and you could be. Peach bud, the embryo has 2 ovules, and you might be killing one of them, and maybe that's why it turns out to be a button. I don't know.
We're seeing a lot of buttoning and a lot of the blank shoots, so that's what I'm wondering, are we putting too much?
Oh, if you're seeing black shoots, yeah, you're too much. And from what my experience of putting high rates on.
When using Exceed as a chemical thinner, would a prior Etifon treatment, would that affect it? Would it inhibit it, or would there be a synergistic effect?
Yeah, they would. I mean, based on, I haven't done it, but the experience that the visitor we had from Spain and Andy is that one or the other, I mean, they work, I mean, at different rates, but they work similarly. You don't want to apply both. It would completely.
So if you were using Etifon as say if somebody was using it to delay bloom, then Exceed would not be an option for chemical thinning?
It would be, I mean, it causes the same effect. Like, I think it was, Andy, was it about 100, 150 parts per million of Etifon, similar to 500 parts per million of Exceed, I think.
I don't know that, I didn't test anything to do with the fall application versus.
Oh,
Your question was about juice.
Yep. Are you thinking about fall application?
Yeah. Fall in
That's
effect.
all gone.
Oh.
Yeah, I was referring to fall.
I don't see that having an effect, but I don't, we didn't look at that. I don't know that Baylor has either.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has done it.
Theoretically, it shouldn't, because it's all gone way back then, but once again,
Yeah.
it's off-label.
Now, if I can say one more thing, like, it can take them long. Like, I thought the thinning was done in 2 weeks. I'm sorry, I missed it. But, a lot of the thinning, it kept thinning after a month, not after 2 weeks. So a lot of guys went in and hand thinned after, and we hadn't seen the full thinning effect of the material. So, and it is a difficult thing. In variety differences is probably the biggest difference is it's pretty consistent at a given time, but the night thing, making sure we sprayed at night under those conditions, seemed to help from the previous work that Dr. Melgar had done, and he did a much more thorough. Mine was more of an on-farm trial than it was a scientific study, but
Very sensitive.
it's got promise,
temperature.
though.
Any more questions?
Something like the mechanical pruners that you showed, what would be ballpark price on those things?
Mechanical pruners, what would be the price?
So it depends, but depending on the machine, for example, the last one that you saw from Poland, that is new, will be in Europe will cost around 45,000 hectares. The one that you see the first, that is doing the lateral and the topping, this is around 26,000 hectares. So in between 20,000 euros, but is almost the same than dollar, more or less the same. So from 25,000 euros to 50,000 euros. This is a range of prices depending on the machine, because you have seen that are very different, the architecture of the machine. But I think usually in our conditions, these machines are shared between growers. So it has not a lot of sense for small farms to have each one the machine. So are sharing between growers. Okay?
Yeah, what's the rate of ATS that you recommend?
I can't recommend it because it's, but the question is, what was the rate of the ammonium thiosulfate? There's plenty of literature out there. I mean, I can't tell you, but what we used was, I think, 3.5 gallons per 150, 3.5 gallons of ATS per 150 gallons of water. In the literature, a lot of work was done in the 80s, and usually around a 3%, so I was a little bit less than 3%. Around 3% is what people used, and you got great thinning if you were willing to do it twice, but sometimes you could over-thin. If you do it only once, you still get reasonable thinning on most varieties. The problem is inconsistency, because sometimes you have a short bloom period and you can only get in it once, and you're only getting the tail end or the beginning part, because it doesn't take all flower. The flowers have to be a certain stage for it to burn. It burns the pistil, okay? And you already have, some of those flowers have already pollinated, so even if you brown that pistil, it's already going to set. So that's why scientists would do it twice, early in the bloom and late in the bloom. But if you have a short bloom period, you're only going to be able to get one application on. But it's pretty consistent in reducing your flower count.
Is there any difference in a seed as far as the weather when you put it on, as far as hot, cold?
Yes. Yes, the question was that what's the difference, or is there any difference in the effect of Axeed depending on the temperature? And yes, I mean, the recommendations are like, you should not put it if it's 85 Fahrenheit or higher, because it can, I mean, it could kill all your flowers if it's too hot. So that's, I mean, that's the only thing. You also need to consider if there was any frost before. I mean, it can also impact, you may think that you have still a lot of flowers and then you have less, but temperature is the main thing. Yep.
If it's 50 degrees, does that make it act slower?
I don't think, Andy, do you remember anything below, like a lower limit for temperature? I do not. I don't think there is any lower limit. It's only the higher limit. Yeah.
Well, with most ethanol products, though, it is temperature related as far as the uptake, how quick the uptake is. It's very logarithmic. So really, temperature makes a huge difference with other ethanol products, but I don't know. I haven't done work on this one.
Yeah.
I did study start at Roundtable, which is off-label for peach, and I went all the way through May 8th, and of course our temperatures were going up, even though I was right at night, and my thinning went from like, I was shooting for 60% instead of the rate that they commercially get. They were trying to shoot 30, 35. I wanted to get more done, so the 500 rate on the seed was closer. It was 176 was the ethanol part per million rate. That was pretty much equivalent, but I went up to over 75% in May. So whether that was temperature, it probably wasn't mainly temperature that caused that. It was still night temperature, but it did increase the thinning that I had seen.
And I mean, I remember when we were doing the applications at Kenny Pottett's orchard, like it was March, mid-March or so, but we were in the close to 80s or in the low 80s, trying to finish before it was too late because temperature was going up. No? So even though, again, you're in March, it could happen, but that's where you have to be careful. Maybe if it's starting to get too warm, lower the rate, because if you go to higher than 600 at a high temperature, it would definitely knock off everything.
You got a question for Jose? Good.
Yeah. Chen is next.
Sorry.
Okay. You just mentioned that some thinning approach can cost the buttons. Do you have idea which one is cost the most button? What's the cost? What's the reason cost the buttons? The thinning?
Who's the question?
To you.
When you were measuring
Okay, I didn't quite get the question, Chen. What, the cost of what?
What's causing the buttons?
Oh, the buttons.
Or what compounds?
Wilthin was, which is sulfide, I don't know the chemical name. It was the one that we saw a lot of buttons on. What happens is it slows the pollination process. Eventually the fruitlets hang on. So they obviously tried to pollinate, and then just it got enough. I guess I don't know how to state it physiologically, but the fruit stayed on. Okay, so but Wilthin is the one that definitely had a lot of buttons. If we used a higher rate, then they abscised. But the rate that they recommended just didn't. The button stayed on there, so when you come back, come hand thin, the fruit to space it, you end up leaving a lot of fruit that never sizes. So, but what causes it? It has to be something to do with the pollination process. It wasn't enough to kill the tissue, but it wasn't enough for the pollination to be complete. And so, Wilthin's not the only one to do that. Turgitol is another one. Okay, turgitol burns at the peduncle. Okay, and it gets pollinated, but that peduncle is injured, and the fruit never gets large. So that was another problem using turgitol, which was never labeled though for peach.
I know that.
Well, you want to ask Jose?
I thought you wanted to ask a question.
So from a plant pathology perspective, you showed all those different techniques for the flower thinning. Is there any increase in blossom blight, or could you observe any difference between techniques?
Joanna, was there any increase in blossom blight or other things doing the flower thinning? I did not see any pathological incidents of increasing like flower blight, but we do get sometimes toxicity on the 1-year-old shoots. So that's what we mostly look at, or on the leaves come out, might have a little bit of burn. But I never noticed the increase in either blossom blight or bacterial canker. Most bacterial canker is already in the tree and working by the time we do the thinning. I see bacterial canker starting to show up in the young wood in early February, and we're doing all this in March. But I've never noticed it. Not saying that it didn't. I think I would have noticed it, or the grower would have told me if he noticed it. So, but I can't say 100%. You want to ask?
Sorry, I have a question for Jose Enrique. Hola, Jose Enrique. How are you?
Hello, hi. Fine, fine.
So I have a question because I am not expertise in irrigation, but it's a question that sometimes we have. So I compare the volume tree with the small tree, the bidimensional with the non-bidimensional. In one we have 16,000 cubic meters. In the other one, we have the half. The question for Enrique is, what do you think about irrigation needs? If we reduce the canopy by the half, we can expect a reduction of irrigation by the half, or is not linear?
Well,
do you understand the question?
Actually.
So which is the effect of reducing the canopy from traditional to intensive or superintensive in water consumption? Because we reduce the canopy by the half, more or less. Okay, thank you.
It's not fully linear. Actually, there have been some experiments in which they were irrigating a tree and then suddenly cut by half the canopy of the tree, and there was a strong reduction, but it's not exactly linear. But of course, you will have a reduction on irrigation because the amount of irrigation depends very much on the square meters of leaf that you have to supply with water. So if you have half of the surface of the leaf, you will have a reduction in irrigation, maybe not half. This has to be understood. It's not fully understood yet, but you will have a significant reduction.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Any more questions?
Okay, this question goes to Ignacy. Do you have any, for this kind of like 2D system, the rootstock of course is critical, right? You need a dwarf rootstock. Do you have any kind of requirement on the science side?
Any kind of?
You mean a smaller scion?
Yeah. Do you have any kind of preference for the signs? And
Do you have any scions that are cultivars, not the rootstock, but cultivars that are more conducive? They grow small. They're less
vigor.
Yeah.
So your question is if we have varieties with less vigor? Yes, of course. We have in the new breeding programs, for example, one that is the most important is PSV in Spain. When we compare the vigor of the varieties, we can have differences in more than 30%. But also in traditional varieties, when we compare the Sweet Henry, for example, with Royal Glory, we can have 20–30% of the vigor. So, and there is a new line of selecting varieties with less vigor, thinking on the future limitations of growth regulators. Of course, there is a lot of variability in this character. Thank you.
Chad, you got breed smaller trees.
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Rieger, how do I square, or you and, I'm sorry, if we want to go high density and two-dimensional with no PGR and the rootstocks that you've mentioned, I believe, controller, root pack, I believe, Dr. Rieger, you said those will not survive here.
Well, I have an answer for you, but I mean, we're trying now. MP29 is what you could probably use right now if you get it to propagate well, but it'll give you about a 40. MP29 would produce the same tree as a root pack 20 that he talked about. Okay, and with MP29, it produces shorter internodes, so even if you summer prune, it's not going to set out a nice big shoot, which is what the Caldor controls in Spain. You know, when on their vigorous varieties or rootstocks, they can come back and Caldor after they summer prune. With Guardian, you're not going to be able to do that. Guardian will grow, really regrow when you do that. So MP29 allows you to do that. Now, some of the other rootstocks, the problem with root pack 20 and root pack 40, They have not done well in South Carolina, okay, with disease issues. So that's, and controller 6 is runted out on me after year 6. So it was a nice tree, but it's runting out. And not only for me, but it's runting out in parts of California. So we still don't have the perfect rootstock. But as far as size control, the only one that I'd recommend would be MP29 for Georgia and South Carolina. But, you know, we have the issues with it, obviously, with trying to get enough trees and whatever.
Well, I just want to make sure Dr. Lau, and that everybody knows Dr. Lau, that he knows what he's
Well,
got ahead
Jekin
of
said
him.
he's going to get the solution, so I ain't worried.
Just an additional comment. I think sometimes it's something confusing about the rootstocks, because if we compare with apple, you can imagine M9, how we're reducing the vigor compared to MM106, okay? But for peach, we don't need a really dwarfing rootstocks, because for most of the varieties that are producing in 1-year-old wood, we need a minimum vigor. And sometimes in our conditions with this low vigor, we have not enough vigor to renew all the 1-year branches. So if we compare the fructification with the apple compared to the peach, it's nothing to compare. So we need a minimum vigor. Let's say, I prefer to be thinking always in size controlling rootstocks, better than dwarfing rootstocks. Because for peach, we saw a lot of problems in very worse soils with these mid-vigor rootstocks, the lack of vigor. And then the quality is a disaster. So keep this in mind, because also I put Rupac 40 as a medium vigor. In which soils we need to use coulter with Rupac 40 and with Rupac 20. So be careful about that. So I don't want too low vigor in any species, in apple or pear or peach, because then the fruit size and the fruit yield will be collapsed, okay?
Add to that, we don't have to worry about fruit size with MP29. It produces large fruit. I have not a planar system, but I have a V system, and MP29 works well in that, and the controllers worked well until recently, which are more medium vigor versus MP29. So, but what he's saying, some of the quote dwarfing stalks don't. When you do this renewal pruning, you end up getting less and less, new shoots coming, and that is a concern. So rootstock still needs to be evaluated in these systems, which we are to some extent, at least I am. But
I have a question for both Ignacy and Jose Enrique. And since we have here a lot of growers, when you have seen that change happening, you're saying like about 20% of peach orchards in Catalonia are now in 2D, and same with the super and high density olive orchards. Yeah. How did growers adjust? I mean, we're talking about vigor, so how did they adjust? How was the process for them to adjust fertilization, irrigation, other than, getting into mechanization and all these?
No, I think it's a very important question, because I remember when 50 years ago we started using the M9 in Europe, it was a disaster. So the people cannot manage the M9 compared to the MM106. It requires more than 15 years to manage properly. So the irrigation, fertilization, the pruning, it takes a lot of time. So the people should be trained in this system. We said always in Europe that managing these high density orchards is like managing a Ferrari. It's the same. So it's something that you should be very smart with a lot of information. I put in the slide. We need a lot of information. We need to train the growers, because the change is huge. You cannot manage the GF677 a big tree like Rupac 40 or Rupac 20, a small tree. So it's all different. One mistake in the irrigation will collapse the tree. With GF or Guardian, no problem. So we have every year, when I was at IRTA for 25 years, we train the growers every year doing seminars, so it takes a long time. But the balance in peach, for example, is that the growers is not able to change as in apple in Spain. So it's what I told you. Still 80% of the orchards are in goblet. One day not change with the data what I show, because the goblet, this pedestrian, with GF is very cheap to plant, is the half than the intensive, and they can have a good yields because the vigor of rootstock fills the space quite good, quite fast. And this is one of the questions. And just a final, because I think in Europe we have now in a very difficult moment, because the society, the urban people, the European Union, the Green Deal, all the people is asking for sustainability, to be efficient to the environment. So it's a lot of concern from the cities about the environment, mainly in Germany. So what the growers need to do to be more sustainable, of course, changing to the more intensive orchards. So the efficiency comes from small trees because are more efficient. It has been published. But look the data that I show you. A full pack orchard of peach in B-axis with hail net, it costs $50,000 per hectare. So, more or less the same. It's the same, now it's 1-1. So 50,000 euros per hectare. In apple, a full package apple, intensive, 3 by 0.5, it costs 60,000 euros per hectare. So this is the problem. We need this to be efficient, the intensification, the small trees, and who pays this cost? European Union can give to our growers 30% of the subsidies to plant to these orchards, but the problem is the prices, as you saw, are linear, are not like this. And then if you go back over the last 20 years, the cost increased 2.5 times and the price only 1.2 times over the last 20 years. And this is the problem. And the claim for most of the supermarkets is low prices, low prices, low prices. And then the grower, the profit is zero. And this is the problem of Europe. You know, 1 year ago, for 1 month, there were protests and collapsed Europe. But the main reason of the protest is the profit of the growers is going down year by year. This is the problem in Europe. So all this bureaucracy, environmental affairs, etc., puts a lot of effort to the growers to get some subsidies, but at the end, the main problem is the lack of profit, especially in apple and peach, that the consumption is going down. So this is a very difficult situation for us, and now will be another a set of protests because, you know, the European Union joined Mercosur, and this will be another problem for Europe because they import the apples from Brazil half of the price than in Spain. And this is another big problem. The same that happens from Morocco, then the tomatoes from Morocco are going to the European Union without any restriction of pesticides to the half price. So this is the situation in Europe. So it's very, very, very difficult for the future. So, and in conclusion, what happens? Most of the family growers are disappearing. The young people, less and less young people for the family growers, and are big companies like investing funds that put in money in agriculture and are growing, and direct contracts between these companies, big companies, with the supermarkets. The same here, family tree with Costco, okay, a contract. And the family growers reducing because no young people is interested in this business. Perhaps I am a bit pessimist, but it's the situation, okay? It's just a comment to know what is happening in Europe, because, you know, Europe always is leading the greening, the sustainability, the efficiency, the Agenda 2030, and at the end, all this cost is for the growers, not the benefit.
Yeah, may I add something about the control of vigor? Well, growers in my area, they usually control vigor by using pruning, control of fertilization, especially nitrogen, and control of water. By using pruning only is quite difficult if you are using a low vigor variety. So most of the people, what they do is that they reduce nitrogen supply down to the limit. And together, well, most of the people in my area, most of them, they use deficit irrigation strategies. Very few growers in my area use full irrigation for two reasons. First of all, because in many orchards, enough water is not available for full irrigation. But the main reason is because if you fully irrigated the orchard, the control of vigor becomes very difficult. So people, as I say, they use some irrigation, deficit irrigation strategy to help them to control the vigor. Maybe in a particular year, the yield is penalized to some extent, 10, 15%, but at the long range, to ensure a long life cycle of the orchard, deficit irrigation is very effective for controlling vigor. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just a comment about vigor. I think it's important two concepts. The first one is when we are neighboring the tree, reducing the space, the vigor, you reduce it because the competition between the roots. So we have several trials. We demonstrate that doubling the density, narrowing the trees, we reduce by 30% the tree of the vigor. So the trunk, you reduce it by 30%. And second, doing the summer pruning, we reduce another 15, 20% because it's very easy. If you have a control without summer pruning, and with summer pruning, we reduce in between 15 and 20% the vigor. So these two aspects are important in order to control the tree vigor. You know this.
Yeah.
The neighbor. Yeah.
Summer pruning always devigorates us, remember that.
All right, any more questions from the audience? If not, we're going to conclude the session. Thank you so much for these great contributions. I think that was a great session. So.